Okay, so once again, good evening, magandang gabi po, maayong gabi, and once again, good evening everyone for joining us tonight for this learning and sharing um, series about our ASLP Headway Series 2. So we started a webinar series for the reason that we need to continue our learning and continuous education with our librarians in the country and around the world. So even though there's a pandemic ongoing as a crisis that we are facing right now, we continue to share good practices to our librarians in the Philippines. So to start with, once again, this is the Association of Special Libraries of the Philippines, your organizer for this Headway Series number 2. Discovery Tool for Your Library, a webinar on open source Vufind discovery software. So to start with, I would like to invite everyone to please sing with us with the national anthem of the Philippines, to be followed by the opening prayer by our one of the officer of the Association of Special Libraries of the Philippines.
Let us bow our heads and put ourselves in the presence of our Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, thank you that your presence is with us right now. We pray that you would deepen our comprehension, broaden our thinking, and transform our understanding of what we are about to learn. May you shower your blessings after this webinar so that we may spread what we learned in the spirit of your love and generosity. Keep us physically safe and guard our hearts and minds from pride and selfishness. We ask all this in the holy name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ms. Mabel Caasi, the auditor of the Association of Special Libraries of the Philippines, for the opening prayer. And this time, I would like to give the floor, or the online floor, to our Vice President, the conference chair for this webinar series, Mr. Eugene Espinoza.
Thank you, Kevin. To our brilliant resource person, Demian Katz, the nicest developer I've ever met. To our panelists, my former teacher in some of my LIS subjects, Sir Chito Angeles, fellow ASLP officers and members, fellow library and information professionals, participants, good evening. We are gathered here tonight for ASLP's today in Dimian's time zone. We are gathered here tonight for ASLP's Headway webinar series number 2 with a theme of Discovery Tool for Your Library, a webinar on open source Vufind discovery software. Let me relate to you how we were able to come up with the topic and how we were able to invite our renowned international resource person. Back in July this year, I was able to attend a webinar on Vufind, open source, and the power of community, sponsored by the Bengal Library Association, somewhere in India, I guess. And Demian was one of the speakers in this webinar. So it got me into thinking, if the Bengal Library Association was able to invite Demian for a webinar, maybe we can invite him for an ASLP webinar. Vufind, which includes Demian, its lead developer, is actually on my radar, such that if there is a conference or seminar, I would fit it in, and this pandemic has enabled us to do that. Since I am part of the Vufind list and I already know the email address of Demian, so I tried to email him regarding a plan of inviting him for a webinar that would be catered to Filipino library and information professionals. And with just a blink of an eye, he was already communicating with me, and the rest is history. We are now about to hear some wondrous discussion on the discovery tools, as well as our main topic, Vufind discovery software. Personally, I was actually testing Vufind way back in 2013 in my previous work. If I'm not mistaken, and Demian could correct me on this, Vufind came out only last 2010. The software was still in its infancy, and there was a use case wherein I am having some difficulties fitting in, so I got stalled in trying out Vufind back then. Fast forward today, the University of the Philippines, Diliman, having installed the first known Vufind installation in the Philippines, through the initiative of our panelists today, my former teacher in some LI subjects in the UP School of Library and Information Studies, in Aludi, IDOL, and IT for Libraries, Sir Chito Angeles. This brought back my desire of tabbing it in one of the webinars for ASLP. And yes, we are about to hear from these two magnificent IT persons. With this being said, I welcome you to the first of its kind of webinar sponsored by a local organization, a late day or late night webinar. The 2020 ASLP Headway's webinar series number 2, Discovery Tool for Your Library, a webinar on open source Vufind discovery software. And then I have to introduce our speaker, right, Kevin? So our speaker for today is one of the nicest and humblest developer I've met. I can still remember the first time I posted in the Vufind email is way back in April 2013 regarding my problems on solar indexing and my MySQL database. He was so helpful. And as time goes by, reading the messages in the Vufind list, Demian also goes beyond to be able to help those having problems with their Vufind installation. I admired him through this, and I wanted that someday I'd be able to meet Demian. This pandemic made that realization, even though it would have been better if we met face to face. Professionally, Demian is the lead developer of the open source Vufind discovery software, which was developed in Villanova University, his mother institution. Aside from the Vufind developer tag, as described in Demian's Twitter account, he is a librarian, dime novel enthusiast, game book expert, copy breeder, Wuvian, praise bibliographer. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our resource person, Demian Katz.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here. I appreciate everyone joining at this relatively late hour to accommodate my schedule. And I hope that this is just the beginning. I'm very excited to be able to collaborate with many of you in the time to come. Hopefully by now everyone can see my slides, and to be respectful of your time, I'm going to jump right in and start talking about Vufind. So first I wanted to give a little overview of what I will be talking about tonight. First of all, of course, what is Vufind? What problems does it solve? What are its features? And what systems does it operate with? Of course, knowing what Vufind is not that useful if you can't actually use it. So I'd like to talk about some of the skills you would need to make the most of Vufind. And if you don't already have those skills, I'd like to help you find places where you can learn them. And finally, I'd like to talk about what's coming in the future for Vufind, since, as Eugene says, we've been around for quite a while. We hope to be around for longer still, and there's always something new going on. So let's start with what is Vufind. It is what we like to call a flexible search engine and discovery interface for all of your content and end user functionality. It lets you search the things in your collection, and it lets your users interact with your services all in a consistent and user-friendly way. Very importantly, it's open source, which means that you can install it for free, you can customize it to your needs, and there's a community of developers working on the project that you can potentially collaborate with. The software is designed to be highly configurable, so you can change a lot of its behavior without having to edit any code. But it's also highly customizable and highly extensible. So if you do want to get into the programming, there are a lot of ways to do that effectively and efficiently. As I said, it's also community supported. So if you get into the Vufind community, you're supported by other developers around the world who have some shared common needs and interests. So Vufind came about because there were a number of problems that libraries were facing that a shared software project seemed like the best solution to. One big one, of course, is that in most libraries, we have what is often called the silo problem. Our information is distributed across multiple systems, institutional repositories, catalogs, software subscriptions, and this makes it hard for people to find things because they have to look around in a number of places. And this is made worse by the fact that some systems have outdated, inconsistent, or confusing user interfaces. At the time that Vufind started to be developed, most users were already familiar with search engines like Google and had certain expectations about how online search should work. But a lot of the leading library systems were still really centered on a card catalog kind of model, which, while it has its advantages, was unfamiliar to users without a library background. Another issue is that change is inevitable in technology, but when you have many distributed systems and they're all changing from time to time, this can confuse your users even more because you may be forced to change the way things look or behave without having the ability to control that. And finally, I'm a librarian. There are many librarians here. I think we all know librarians are detail-oriented people who really care about how their users can find things, which means that we like to have a lot of control over our search experience. We want to be able to affect how results are ranked. We want to control how records are displayed to users because we really care about giving the best experience and delivering the information that we're trying to deliver. So how does Vufind solve all of these problems? The biggest way is by providing a single search interface that can interact with other systems and sources of data and bring everything together in one place. So this reduces the silo problem by giving you a single search box that users can type into that will give them an overview of all of your resources. It eliminates the inconsistency problem rather than sending users to multiple systems that all look different. You have them in one place with a single set of behavior. It insulates you against change because if you put Vufind in front of all of your other systems, if those systems should change in the future, you of course need to adjust the way they interact with Vufind, but your users are still just going to see Vufind. It only changes if you want it to change, not because a vendor has changed something or an upgrade has drastically changed your behavior. As I mentioned earlier, Vufind is highly configurable and easy to customize. And this allows libraries to respond to local needs. There are many commercial solutions that do a lot of the same things that Vufind does, but in many of those systems, if you want to change something, you have to ask the vendor to do it. They may do it, or they may say, that will be an enhancement request and put you in a queue where you could wait for years. So if you have the resources to do the work locally, Vufind is a good way to enable you to be extremely responsive and flexible in the user interface you present to your users. With that background out of the way, let's start to look at some of the features that Vufind offers you. As I mentioned, the biggest feature of all is the search interface, which was originally designed to be similar to Google, but with more of a library flavor. You have a single search box that you type things into, you get a ranked list of results, and then you have some controls that you can use to narrow it down. So that's the relevance ranking and faceted navigation features. Vufind also interacts with a lot of library systems. So it provides users with access to common functions like placing holds on books, renewing things they have checked out, checking the status of fines, and so forth. And again, this is a place where, because Vufind sits in front of your library system, if you should change or upgrade, your users don't have to be retrained. Vufind also adds some user features, such as the ability for users to create lists of favorite books, which they can keep private or share with others. They can tag things and comment on things. So it's a place where you can share information about your resources. You can curate sets of records. This could be useful for in an academic library, sharing records related to a course, or in a public library for allowing your community to feedback about your collection. Vufind also has some of the usual features to make users, to help users find what they're looking for. It gives you an auto suggest as you're typing, so it can try to find titles that match your typing. If you misspell something, it will offer suggestions. It can also provide some advanced advice. If a search doesn't turn up any results, it can suggest some advanced syntax that might bring up additional records. Vufind uses responsive design, which means that based on the size of the screen on which the interface is being viewed, it can adjust its layout. So this enables the single piece of software to work well both in a desktop environment on a computer or a mobile environment on a phone. All the same information is there, but in a smaller screen, some things are collapsed and reorganized to make it easier to manage. The system supports integration with bibliographic management tools like Zotero, RefWorks, EndNote, and so forth. So you can export records to other systems. It also has built-in citation generation. so that it can provide suggested citations in some of the common citation formats, which can be useful for students. Finally, Vufind is internationalized because this is built by an international community. We have many different translations of the user interface, more than 30 different versions. So wherever you are, there's a good chance that your user community will be able to read and understand the interface. And if you support a community that does not already have language support in Vufind, I'm happy to work with you to add that support. Having talked about all the things that Vufind is and that Vufind does, it's also important to be clear about what Vufind is not, because it's a really useful layer in your system, but it doesn't do everything. So most importantly, Vufind is not a replacement for your integrated library system. So it is not going to itself keep track of your holdings, deal with acquisitions, allow you to check out books to users. It assumes you already have a system that does those things. It just provides an enhanced ability to search the records in that system. Similarly, it's not a replacement for your institutional or digital repository. It does not store the main copies of your records. It indexes them for searching purposes, but assumes that you're managing your data in other systems. It is a search layer, but it is not a record management system of any sort. It is also not by itself an aggregated index of e-resources. So it will not simply by being installed allow you to search across all of your subscription databases, because it requires you to have access to and index that data. In some cases, you can negotiate with your vendors to obtain data that you can locally index and search within Vufind. But the other alternative is to subscribe to a third-party service like Summon or EBSCO Discovery that will provide you access to that data. And the important thing is that while Vufind is not these three things, it does work well with all of them. You can index data from all of these systems. And if you subscribe to a third-party web-scale discovery service, Vufind can use APIs to incorporate those results into its searching. To talk a little more about exactly what Vufind supports in terms of the technology it's built on, as well as the systems it can interact with. Vufind itself is built primarily in the PHP programming language using a set of components from the Laminas project. And it uses Apache Solr, which is an open source search engine, to power most of its searching. As I mentioned, it can pull in records from a lot of different places so that you can search them through its interface. It has particularly strong support for MARC records, which of course will come from most library systems, and many common flavors of XML, which you may be able to get from a digital repository or institutional repository. So as I say, it can be used to bring together content from many types of systems, integrated library systems, both by loading MARC records and also by interacting with them in real time for patron functionality, which it does through what we call ILS drivers. We support more than a dozen common systems, and we can help you build your own driver if you use something that we don't already support. But already supported are some of the biggest open source and commercial systems, including Koha, Evergreen, Folio, and Alma. We work well with content management systems, including repositories, primarily by using the OAI PMH protocol, which is a convenient way of sharing metadata between systems. Vufind can use that to harvest records from any system that supports it, and then use its XML importing tool to load those records into its index. Vufind also works well with any web-based system, preferably those that provide a sitemap for crawling by search engines. You can set up Vufind to crawl all of the pages on a website and provide searching of those, which, for example, could be useful if you want to incorporate searching of your library homepage along with searching of your records and other content. And finally, as I mentioned, we can interact with web scale discovery services through APIs. So having talked about what Vufind is and isn't and what it can interact with, it's time to talk about what skills you need to make the most of it. And I like to share this skills for the 21st library team slide because this, I think, is not applicable just to Vufind, but to almost any technology in the current era. If you want your library to be able to make the most of technology, it's extremely helpful to have a particular set of skills. And I say these are skills for a team because it's unreasonable to expect a single person to know all of these things. But if everyone in your library can pick up one or two of these and work together, you can really accomplish a great deal. So the first of these skills is systems administration, the ability to stand up software and make it work on the web so that it's available to your users. Understanding the operating system Linux or container platforms like Docker can be really helpful for giving you the ability to stand up systems and make them available as needed. Of course, web technologies are vitally important too, since so much of our communication is done over the web, especially now with the pandemic. Being able to create HTML and use CSS to apply styles and understand how these things work is really helpful. Some degree of programming is also helpful. There are many languages, and if you learn any one of them, you have powerful skills that can be adapted to others. But programming is useful in libraries, not just for running packages like Vufind, but also for automating tasks like editing records or managing spreadsheets of statistics, having the ability to really tell your computer what to do and how to do it can save you huge amounts of time, even if you have just some sort of basic low-level skills. Of course, in libraries, we also love metadata, and understanding all of these formats and how to translate between them and what the different elements of them mean, again, is an important piece of the puzzle. If you want to set up Vufind to search effectively, understanding what data is in what fields and how they relate to one another will empower you to make things more effective. Though, of course, Vufind comes with good defaults that should work out of the box for you. It's really important as well to understand some of the principles of user interface design and best practices, things like web accessibility standards, all of the things that as librarians we do in person, we need to take online and think about a little bit differently. But of course, the end goals are the same. We want to be sure that everyone in our community receives the support and information that they need, and that we are communicating with them clearly. And in the absence of in-person interactions, the way we present our user interfaces is, the new public service that we provide. And so doing that to the best of our abilities is extremely important. And finally, project planning and collaboration are vital skills because, as I say, no one person is going to be an expert in all of these skills. We need to work together and share our abilities. And so being able to do that effectively is really important. And working in open source is one way to build those skills because it is really an exercise in constant collaboration. So having gotten my high-level lecture out of the way, let's talk about specific prerequisites for Vufind in particular. So if you just want to install Vufind and try it out, the main things you need to be comfortable with are running some commands on the command line, whether that be in Linux or in Windows, and also with editing configuration files, because Most of Vufind's basic configuration is just accomplished by opening a text file in an editor and changing a couple of settings. And you certainly just need to be comfortable enough to try these things. You don't have to be an expert. Vufind's documentation has a lot of step-by-step instruction that will help you. So you just need a little bit of fearlessness to dive in and try. Now, if you want to customize the way Vufind looks and feels by changing its theme, you need a few more skills. Of course, you'll need some HTML and CSS knowledge, those basic web technologies, because most of Vufind's theme is presented as template files that mostly look like HTML and CSS. Having a little bit of PHP helps as well, because some of the templates have logic in them to display things when certain conditions are met and so forth. And if you want to get into some of the really advanced styling, Vufind uses Less, which is a CSS preprocessor to make some of its style generation more convenient. So understanding that lets you get a little deeper. But if you don't understand Less or haven't learned it yet, it's certainly not a requirement. If you want to extend Vufind's code to add whole new features beyond what's available through theme customization and configuration, that's when you'll want to have a deeper understanding of PHP. Familiarity with Laminas helps, but is not required. The main thing is that Vufind is built using object-oriented programming principles. And so a basic understanding of those structures and concepts should make the rest of the platform considerably more clear. Finally, if you want to change the way the search behavior works, some understanding of the Solr index will help you. And if you're using a third-party system like a Summon or an EDS, understanding the programming interfaces, the APIs used by that platform will help you. So hopefully this hasn't been too intimidating, because I know this is a lot, and as I say, no one person knows all of these things. But you can learn, and I want to help you, and the whole community wants to help you. So I'm going to move on to talk about some of the ways you can begin to learn more of these things. First of all, one of the things that the Vufind community does is we get together every month for an online community call, which anyone is free to join. Unfortunately, in the Philippines, because of the time difference, these calls would occur around 9 p.m. But if you really want to come, you're certainly welcome to. And if you don't, we do record part of those calls every month in order to create a series of video tutorials on Vufind topics that get asked about frequently. And if you watch all of the videos together, it's kind of like a class on working your way up into Vufind familiarity. So all of those are freely available online at the URL on this slide. And so I encourage you to take a look. They'll walk you from installing Vufind and indexing records into it all the way up to writing some custom code. Of course, they assume some familiarity with the underlying technologies, but they could be used in combination with other tutorials to really get a deep knowledge of how to do some of these things. Additionally, I've been writing a book to accompany the video lectures, which covers a lot of the same topics, as well as some historical background, some deeper explanation of how Solr works, how to customize record views, and so on and so forth. This will be made available for free online, and if you're really eager to see it, you can email me after this event and I'll be happy to send you a draft. I welcome feedback. You know, my goal is to just make this as easy for everyone as possible and to share the knowledge. There are a few other ways you can learn more. You can join our community. I've already talked about this a bit, but we have, in addition to some of the things I've already mentioned, a number of active mailing lists, which you can sign up for through the vufind.org website, where you can ask questions and get answers. We have a Slack instance at vufind.slack.com, which is sort of a real-time chat platform where you can ask questions as well. We have the community calls that I've already talked about. The project lives on GitHub, which is a really wonderful online platform for software development and collaboration. So if you want to look at the code, see some of the recent activity, or participate in the development, GitHub is a great place to do that. And finally, every year we have an annual summit. This past year's summit was online, of course, and it was so successful that I expect that future summits will also have an online component. These usually happen in the fall, in September or October. Again, I'm sure that the time difference would present some challenges for this, but if there comes to be a significant Filipino Vufind community, I would love to work with you to figure out ways to accommodate that and make it fit into our summit process, because we really do want to broaden our collaboration widely and welcome everyone. So the future, let's talk about what's coming to Vufind next. So once you've learned about it and have started using it, you have something to look forward to. First of all, typically Vufind puts out 2 significant releases every year. Sort of a major release which updates the architecture and brings things up to date with current technology, and then a feature release that adds some additional features to the last major release without breaking too much compatibility. So what we currently have are version 7.1, which will be coming up early next year, and then the next major version 8.0 later in the year. I really try as hard as I can to make Vufind upgrades as painless as possible, because it's no fun to spend all of your time maintaining software. But at the same time, we're faced with constantly changing technology and standards. And so it's a balance to maintain. And we, as I say, we try our best to support, but some change is inevitable. And so it's just something every year to be prepared for, that new versions will come along. A little bit of adjustment may be needed to get up to date. But if you put in that effort at the new releases, in the long term, it's not too much work and it keeps you up to date and secure. The other big development that's going on right now is we're working on joining the Open Library Foundation, which is a collaboration of multiple open source projects designed to ensure their sustainability. For many years, Vufind has been a project of Villanova University, and Villanova has been a great home for the project and has offered it a lot of support and resources. Certainly, I'm very happy to be employed there and to be able to do this work and share this technology. But because so many people collaborate with us all over the world, it no longer really feels appropriate for a single institution to hold the project, because if in the future something were to change at Villanova and priorities would shift, we don't want the project to suffer as a result of that. We want a clear way for the whole community to come together and keep things running. So by joining the Open Library Foundation, the plan is that Villanova's support will be in no way diminished, but we will make it easier for more people to bring more to the project and hopefully allow it to grow even further and be sustainable long into the future. Because all of this is somewhat new and we're building some new structures to support the project, this also means that there are opportunities to get involved. There will be some new project roles that will need to be filled. So anyone who's really excited about the project and wants to support it and gain some professional experience in an international project may have opportunities in the coming months to serve on a committee or a board and help us out. So if you're interested in that, please join the community, follow along, and stay tuned. And in the coming year, you may have some great opportunities. So that's really everything I had to present. So I know that we're going to have time for questions and answers, and I look forward to answering all the questions that come in. You can also, of course, find out a lot more at the vufind.org website, or you can contact me. My email address is damian.katz@villanova.edu. I watch the Vufind Slack all the time, and I'm on Twitter as @Demian Katz. So don't hesitate to ask questions. I love to support this project and help people. So just reach out. Thank you very much. And I will stop sharing my slides now.
Thank you, Justin, and good evening, colleagues and friends. And good morning, Damian, who's joining us from the other side of the globe. Yeah, basically, I'm here to share with you our experience in implementing Vufind as our discovery service at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Yeah, let me share my slide. Okay. So before we start, maybe I'll just tell you briefly how I was able to learn about the Viewfind software. I was surprised to hear Eugene that he learned about this software in India, because actually I also learned the software in India back in 2016 when I attended a training workshop there. And the software was briefly introduced to us. But it was only last year that I was able to explore more about the software, and it was only early this year that we started the implementation. And last June, we were able to launch our version of Viewfind, which we call Tuklas. Okay, that's how we named our web scale discovery service. So Tuklas basically is a Filipino word which means discover, and I did some customization on its interface and added some functionalities to meet the requirements of our users. So what can be found or can be searched through this platform? We have, of course, our collection of books, journals, theses and dissertations, archival documents, and even articles indexed from newspapers and magazines. And our current setup basically contains over 1 million records now. So it's a combination of resources coming from different databases, primarily our online catalog, which is in-house developed, the iLive. And we also have 2 other index databases, which are also custom developed. So all in all, we have more than 1 million records being indexed by the Apache Solar of Vufind. And this is only for the UP Diliman collection. In fact, we have other databases that we have not yet integrated into the Vufind discovery service. But in the future, we are actually looking for a bigger implementation. So we are setting up a union database of the collections coming from the different constituent universities of the University of the Philippines. As you know, we have 8 constituent universities and about 17 campuses all around the country. So basically, the objective is to put up a single central database, and then have it indexed by Vufind. And so users can search the database using this platform. And we are also adding some of our local databases like the institutional repository and our open access repository. So expect this to happen very soon because we are already implementing our new system, which will replace our existing online catalog. Okay, so what we love about Vufind, um, Damian already mentioned about the exciting features of Vufind, but what we love most about it are the following. So, of course, the faceted search. This is primarily the reason why I decided to study the software. Last year, I did a research on faceted search engines, and I was able to explore the features of Vufind and did a usability testing for the software, and that's how I was convinced that this can actually replace our existing online public access catalog. And so using the faceted search, you can narrow down the search results and use the available facets, the filters, to be able to retrieve the exact records that you are looking for. Also, um, Viewfind can link you to the full text, like for instance, the electronic resources available in other websites. So if it's reflected in the record, you can easily link the user to the actual resource. And it has book previews, which are actually automatically downloaded from various websites, such as from Google Books, the Open Library, and the HT Trust. So the book previews are generated or downloaded and displayed automatically if they are available. Also, the citations are very good. This is a very good feature which allows us to generate citations in different formats like APA, MLA, and Chicago. Okay. And then another good feature is its ability to export the records into various formats like Mark XML, BibTeX, and EndNote, which are actually useful and can be imported in other applications like reference managers such as Zotero or Mendeley. And as already mentioned earlier, there's a feature called Search Suggestions that gives you some suggested keywords to use for your searching. And there are advanced options using fuzzy search, Boolean operators, and many other advanced search options. And one thing I like most about Viewfind is that its indexing is very fast. We actually have in our online catalog more than 800,000 records. And when I started importing this into Viewfind, into Apache Sol-R for indexing, it took only around 30 minutes to an hour to complete the processing of the records, and suddenly it's already searchable through our Tuklas. And then, of course, the search response time, it's very important. So this is one feature that I consider important in choosing a search engine. So using Viewfind, even though you have a very large data set, it could give you the results very quickly. So just like searching Google. Okay, and then another thing is that Viewfind is modular. So you can just enable the modules or the features that you think will be useful for your users, because there are so many features available in the system. So you can just turn them off if you don't need them. And honestly, I have not explored all of this. I just chose whichever I think will be useful for our users. And it's of course highly customizable. So that's why we are able to customize the system to our needs, and including the interface. And I was able to connect this to our existing library system. So even though there is no available driver for our ILS, because our ILS is in-house developed, so I have to develop another application, an API to connect Viewfind to our ILS so that it could retrieve the holdings and the real-time status of the books for circulation, whether the items are on loan or on shelf. Okay, so that's part of the major customization that I did. And as mentioned also, it's mobile responsive. So you can use your mobile phones, tablets, or any other device with web browser, and the display automatically adjusts to your available screen size. And it's actually surprising to learn that 33% of our users are actually using mobile devices or smartphones. So that is according to the Google Analytics, which I place in the Viewfind to be able to track the users using our discovery service. So again, about 33% are actually mobile users. And also, as mentioned, Viewfind supports the OAI PMH, which is an international standard for the exchange of records in various formats, or specifically in this case, the metadata encoded in MARC or XML. So you can actually search various databases and be able to maintain a central index in Viewfind. Okay, so for a screenshot of our implementation, this is the main page. And currently, as I've mentioned, there are at least 3 databases that are already indexed in this discovery service. And this is the search interface, which I also customized. And as you can see, the location of the resources are reflected under the facet for the unit library. Of course, the book the image cover for books are displayed automatically. And for the display of the record details, um, down below you can see the location where the item is available, and including the real-time status of the book. So whether it's on shelf or on loan. This is the integration I mentioned, which I customized to be able to connect to our existing integrated library system in real time. So basically, that's our implementation of Viewfind. And I'm actually excited to learn more because I just read that there are already newer updates or versions released recently. The last version I used was version 6.1, I think, which was released early this year. And I just heard from Damian that there's a new version. version 8 coming by next year. So I'm excited to learn more about the updates and the future implementation of the software. So if you wish to try our system, you can visit our website ds.mainlive.upd.edu.ph and have a look of on how we have implemented so far Vufind in our library. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sir Chito, for that good sharing with regards to your experience with Viewfind Discovery System. So now I think we have a good numbers of lessons and knowledge and information about how we can use Viewfind as a discovery tool. But before we go to the question and answer, I would like to say I'm sorry and apologies to everyone if we have a problem earlier with the audio. As of the moment, we are doing the live FB streaming. So we have some just echo with the audio earlier. But we're able to find a way to get those echo from your end. So right now, I'll continue as your moderator for the Q&A session. So earlier we have Demian Katz who presents to us about the Viewfind discovery tool software or that we can use to our libraries. And at the same time, we have an on-hand experience from the University of the Philippines main library through Professor Chito Angeles that was shared earlier, a detailed sharing on how they adopt the software on their end to continue their discovery services in the library. So thank you very much both to Sir Chito and Demian Katz for those detailed presentations. So this time, we are going to open the digital floor for question and answer session. We have here about 8 questions from the Q&A button. And we have some questions, Demian and Sir Chito, that was sent through the chat box. I think that would be my first question before we go to the Q&A button. Okay, so let's start with Q&A. I think Demian and Sir Chito is ready. Okay, so Demian, first question would be, is there any compatibility concern if it's regard to integrated or proprietary library system? So what they need to consider if they're using integrated library system, which is commercial, and they plan to use Viewfind as an open source software for their discovery tool. Yes, Demian first.
So there are certainly a few considerations to think about. First of all, does Viewfind already support this system? Because as I noted, we do ship with drivers for quite a few existing platforms. And if it's already there, then it's easy. If we don't already have support for a particular platform, then the real question is, how does the platform expose its data? Because the answer to that will impact how easy it is to integrate with Viewfind. Many platforms have some kind of an API, and if that is well designed, then building a connector between Viewfind and the system shouldn't be terribly difficult. And I would certainly encourage you to talk to your vendor and say, you know, we have this need, can you provide us with an API? Because perhaps they will work with you if it's not already there. If that doesn't have good results, then you're really a little bit more limited. Some of the more extreme solutions we've had to use in some cases include communicating directly with the underlying database behind the ILS. So for example, I've seen platforms where they're connecting to Oracle databases and making queries to get data out. Or in the absolute worst case scenario, doing web scraping, where you actually have Vufind making web requests against the OPAC of the ILS and extracting data from those responses, which is not fun, but it can work. So usually one way or another, you can make it work. It's just a question of what the specific challenges are, and that will vary from platform to platform.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Anything, Sir Chito? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that what I did was to customize the code, and as Damian mentioned, we can actually make a connection directly to the database of your ILS if there's no available driver. So in the case of Vufind, I saw only Koha, I think, is available as a driver, but for other open source ILS, I think there's no available driver yet. So in that case, you have to make your own. So what I did was to hack into the code and create an API to be able to retrieve the holdings from our database. But if you're not looking into real-time integration, you can actually just reflect into the record holdings. For instance, the location where to find the items in your library or libraries if you have many libraries. So you don't really need to connect to your ILS in real if that is not your purpose.
Okay, so thank you very much, Damian and Sir Chito. Just to follow up with, this is in relation to the first question. We have here participants who are using Forest Destiny Library Manager. So do you have on-hand experience in terms of libraries and librarians who are using the software and iOS, which is Destiny Library Manager, who use Vufind, or any information in terms of using this kind of discovery tool? Demian, yes.
I am not familiar with that particular product, so unfortunately I don't think Vufind has a driver for it, but what I am going to do is paste a link into the chat which shows a list of all of the ILSs that are currently supported by Vufind. So if you want to check your system against that list. And of course, I'm always happy to work with people on Vufind projects. So if you need support for something new, I'm certainly happy to talk to you about it and help you work through the process. And I congratulate you, Chito, for doing all of that work without asking me any questions. I'm impressed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So for our participants who are asking for in relation to connection to the ILS and to this Vufind discovery tool, you can check it on the chat box. Demian sent us the link where you can check those library systems that they've worked already and they are using Vufind. Okay, so let's go to another questions. So we have here some questions from our participant first. So the Vufind is not an alternative to any library system in place in any library. I think this was mentioned already earlier that, excuse me, Vufind is not a replacement to the integrated library system or institutional repository that are present in your libraries. And I think Vufind is another software or technology that you can use. Okay, any additional to that, Damian?
Well, I think the way to think about it is that historically in libraries, we've been given one really big piece of software that does almost everything in the form of the ILS. And that has advantages and disadvantages, but one of the disadvantages is that all of your functionality is tied together. And if you want to change something, you end up changing everything. So Vufind is coming from the philosophy of what are the actual individual functions that we're performing. And Vufind is trying to take the user interface, user interaction piece of the puzzle and move it to its own software so that all those other parts can sort of be hidden behind it. And we separate our public face from our private operations and give ourselves more flexibility. And there are some other products that do the same thing as this. So Vufind is certainly not unique. But as I said in my presentation, I just wanted to be clear that it's meant to be a complement to other systems. It by itself will not solve all of your problems.
Okay. So, do you have any additional, Sir Chito?
Actually, the way I look at it, Discovery Service basically provides the public interface, and the other modules of an ILS, for instance, the cataloging, the circulation modules, are all for the internal use of the library staff. So it's better to have a separate system for public use and another for the internal use of the library, because if something happens, like for instance the system backed down, then everyone is affected. Whereas if there are separate systems, the internal processes will not be disturbed, or at least the system is independent of the platform being used by public users. So that's how I look at it, and why it's advantageous to have a discovery service separate from your ILS.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sir Chito, for that answer. Another question we have here: what is the required system requirements or specifications, and can we install it in the laptop?
So
Demian.
it's a hard question to answer, what are the system requirements, because it will depend on what you're trying to do with Vufind. Because if you have a very small library with a couple thousand records, or if you have a huge national library with hundreds of millions of records, the answer to that question will be very different. But the short version is, if you want to try this out for testing purposes, it should run on a laptop. For my own development, I will often use VirtualBox, which is an open source virtualization program, to create a virtual machine. So I run Windows on my laptop, but I can use VirtualBox to create a virtual Linux server, install Vufind on that, and interact with it. That's a really easy and safe way to test it out. But once you're talking about actually deploying this for use by your library, it's going to depend on your user community, the number of records you have, and so forth. And the good news is that Vufind is designed in a way that's very scalable. So you can certainly start it out on a single server with everything in one place and see how well it performs. And if you run into problems, you can add more memory. And over time, you can even scale it out across multiple servers. So for example, you can separate the PHP part that provides the user interface from the Solr part that does the searching. And the Solr part is very scalable. You can distribute the index across multiple nodes. So you can just keep scaling up as you need to for performance. And there are some Vufind users like the National Library of Finland who have huge, heavily used collections and have put a lot of effort into making that scale well and perform well. So if you have these kinds of problems, there's expertise within the community. You can ask questions and get useful advice.
Thank you for that, Demian. I think, Sir Chito, with your experience with Vufind, maybe you can share at least how you prepare your infrastructure in the implementation of Vufind in your institution.
All right. For our production system, we're running on a Linux server, which is a flavor of Red Hat. It's a CentOS. And what else? We're running MySQL as the backend database. Although Vufind actually is a file system based, at least the index, I believe. Correct me, Damian, if I'm wrong. So you don't really need a powerful database backend because the indexing is done in the file system using the Apache Solr. So for as long as you have a powerful machine and a bit of a memory RAM. We're actually using about 32 gigabytes of RAM for our server. And then so for our implementation, basically I develop a script to run automatically on schedule through a in Linux it's called a cron job. Basically it runs the harvester application, so it fetches records from our ILS and other databases, and then I execute the indexer, the Solar indexer, to process these records and make it searchable through the Vufind. So that's how we did the population of records into the system.
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Chito, for that sharing of your on-hand experience with the implementation of Vufind in your library. Okay, so next we have here another question. So we are having good numbers of questions here, Demian. I think our participants, with about 172 participants, are very interested in Vufind as a discovery tool software. Okay, another question here is that, is Vufind compatible with Folio? Is the API already stable?
So integration between Vufind and Folio has been a priority for us since the Folio project was announced, since it's a major new open source system, and we want to support that development. So there are actually now a few libraries that are actually live using Folio and Vufind. So it's all mature enough to be fully functional. Of course, Folio is still young and developing, so I don't know how mature I want to call anything because, you know, we're still working through issues, but it's definitely possible and happening. And I've been in contact with both of the large companies that are involved in Folio, Index Data and EBSCO. They're both supportive of Vufind and have been engaged with keeping things going. So. And also I should say that Villanova is going to be migrating to Folio next year. So that is, of course, also going to strongly motivate good support in Vufind for that platform.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. Another question that we have here, what if we do not have a 21st century type of library team and just simply librarians? How can Vufind help us acquire the needed skills to use the system? So I think this is more on how we can implement Vufind software with a minimal, maybe IT skilled personnel and librarians in the team.
I think that the key to this is to be somewhat fearless about diving in and trying things. As I mentioned, with Vufind, we have a lot of step-by-step instructions that should be able to help you get things up and running, even if you don't fully understand all of the things that are going on. And so along the way, you can learn some things and you can try things. I mentioned VirtualBox earlier, which lets you create a virtual machine on your computer. If you learn a little about VirtualBox and you can create a virtual machine, then there's no danger of damaging your computer if you do the wrong thing. So I encourage people, create a virtual machine, try some things on it. Don't be afraid. If something goes wrong, you can delete it and make a new one. No harm done. You can follow instructions and try things and see what happens. And along the way, ask yourself questions, try to understand why the things that you're doing are having the results you're seeing. But also don't be afraid to reach out to the community. I think librarians are very good at picking up a wide variety of skills. It's a profession that requires an inquisitive mind and flexibility. And so you can get some IT skills even if you don't feel that you're a technology person. And again, the Vufind community is friendly. We don't mind questions. If you don't understand something, ask us. We may not have time to lead you through everything in super detail, but we can at least point you to resources that will explain things better. I think it's really important to all of us as a profession that we share these skills and hone these skills so that we can show the power of libraries and librarians. So I'm very interested in helping people with these kinds of things. And I think in turn, the more people I help, the more people who can help me with Vufind. So it's to everyone's benefit.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. Indeed, I agree with you, Damian, that we librarians need to cope up with the new skills that that we need to have, especially this time of the crisis. And I think librarians are ready to learn new things and more skills as long as we have the purpose and the mission to continue to serve our clients, to continue to disseminate information through these technologies. Anything that you want to add, Sir Chito? Do you have any sharing, like in terms of this concern and challenges in the library setup in the Philippines?
Well, if you are planning to set up Vufind, I think you have to learn at least the basics of the command line. So it's very important because in my experience, there are a lot of things that you have to do using the command line. And if you're not very familiar with it, it's quite difficult because not all of the things are actually documented. So it would be advantageous if you have at least an understanding of running commands using the command line. So especially if you're in a production environment, you need to have some knowledge of the basic Linux command. And that will help a lot in the implementation because, as I've said, not everything is documented. So sometimes you have to think of how you would be able to resolve if some problems or some errors occur during the installation. So should be able to know how to troubleshoot. So I think that's very important.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sir Chito, for that answer. Right now, everyone is very interested with the topic and the question and answer. We are having a lot of questions coming in, but to give consideration to our participants in the Philippines because it's evening and it's night, and I think we don't have enough time to answer more. I think we can just have another three questions. I'll just select maybe most technical or more detailed questions that our speaker and panelists can answer. And maybe if we cannot answer all your questions tonight, we'll try to send all those questions. And I think Damian can see it right now. We can check it out if we can still answer this via email, and we'll send it to those participants who has name on the Q&A button. Okay, so we have three more questions. There is an interesting question here. What is the similarity or differences of Vufind with Aspen Discovery Service? Demian.
So Aspen Discovery Service is actually the second generation of something that was called Vufind Plus for a while. And so about 10 years or so ago, when Vufind went from version 1 to version 2, there was a fork in the community, and some people who didn't like the Zend framework that we were choosing to use at the time of the split decided to continue to run the old Vufind 1.0 code and customize that under the name Vufind Plus. So I haven't followed the development extremely closely. So I'm not sure if Aspen is a continued evolution of that code or something completely new from the same team of developers. But essentially, it's a product similar to Vufind, written by developers who were originally part of the Vufind community and who have continued to talk with us and collaborate with us on occasion. I think that it has some features that are more geared toward public libraries rather than academic or special libraries, though, you know, Vufind tries to cater to everyone. But I think with Vufind, you get a larger community and probably a broader set of features, but Aspen Discovery may have some more specialized things that for certain audiences may be helpful that Vufind doesn't have by default. But they're similar products in any case.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Damian. Any ideas, Sir Chito, that you would like to add for that question? Or nothing? Okay, thank you, Sir Chito. Okay, last two questions. We have here one. Does the SOLR backend auto-index, auto-commit if there are updates in the source records or indexing is done via cron.
So Vufind doesn't really force you to index in any particular way, but certainly most commonly it's done through cron jobs because Vufind is just there to present the information that's in the Solar index, and you have to come up with the process that will get the records there, which will depend on what systems you're using. So in most cases, that's going to be either a cron job that does an OAI PMH harvest and then indexes those harvested records, and or a process that exports MARC records from your ILS using some ILS specific tool and then ingests those into Solar. I think we would all love to see a more real-time integrated environment where if you change a record in your ILS, it immediately propagates to Solar. And that's something that I'd certainly like to work with the Folio community to accomplish, because I think with Folio's architecture in that particular instance, that may be feasible in the future. But it's really going to depend a lot on what systems are involved and how you choose to integrate them. And you know, cron jobs on a regular basis are just the most straightforward way to manage things in the absence of something more specialized.
Okay, so Sir Chita, anything to add?
Regarding that, yes, it's really not automatic. You have to specifically schedule when to run the indexer, and the task of putting the records to the indexing folder is done. It can be automated, of course, but you have to tell the system when to execute the indexer to update the system.
Okay, so for our last question, I think this question was asked by many of our participants. So I'll just rephrase it to make it one, and I think it's very important also to answer. If they are planning to have an institutional repository and their digital collections, is Vufind a good database to look into for their IR and digital collection repository? Demian.
So this is where it's important to understand the function of Vufind, which is to search resources from many places. So if you have an institutional repository, Vufind can be a great interface to allow people to search the contents, but Vufind by itself doesn't give you the ability to actually store documents or describe the metadata for those documents. You need some kind of a platform that will do that work, and then you can connect it to Vufind to make the records more visible and to bring them into a shared index with records from other sources. So Vufind is all about search. You need other things for record management and description. But there are quite a few platforms out there that can do those things like DSpace and Fedora and so forth.
Okay. Do you have any ideas, or Chita, that you would like to share?
I think it has been answered already.
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Chito. Okay, so with that, with the presentations of earlier by Demian and Sir Chito, we were able to gather all the information that we need to have a brief understanding and skills needed, I think, to implement Vufind software in your libraries. And with the sharing on hand of Sir Chito in the Philippine setup of libraries, we can see earlier that they successfully implemented Vufind in their library. So I think it's possible for everyone to have it, just study about the software, look into it. And I think Demian is very willing to help you with his contact information that was given earlier. Go with the community of Vufind users and ask questions that you have in mind in the implementation of Vufind. And I think Sir Chito is very willing also to help us here in the Philippine Library. So once again, thank you very much, Damian and Sir Chito, for giving us your time for this evening to share all your knowledge about Vufind software. Okay, so now we'll have our presentation of your digital certificate. Okay, so we have here the Association of Special Libraries of the Philippines Incorporated awards the Certificate of Appreciation to Demian Katz for sharing his knowledge and expertise as a resource speaker during the conduct of the ASLP Headway series with the theme Discovery Tool for Your Library, a webinar on open source Vufind discovery software on November 2020, signed by the conference chair and vice president of ASLP, Eugene Espinoza, and our president of ASLP, Mercedita B. Servida. So thank you very much, Demian, for your time with us again. And we'll be sending you this digital certificate to your email to have it. And hopefully, soon, we can invite you physically be present here in the Philippines, explore the libraries in the Philippines, and to speak in one of our conferences in the future. Okay? So next, we would like to also give a certificate of appreciation to Sir Chito Angeles. So the Association of Special Libraries of the Philippines Incorporated awards the certificate of appreciation to Chito and Angeles for sharing his knowledge and expertise as a panelist during the conduct of ASLP Headway series with the theme Discovery Tool for Your Library, a webinar on open source Vufind discovery software on November 20, 2020, signed by conference chair and vice president of ASLP, Eugene Espinoza, and president of ASLP, Mercedita B. Servida. So once again, thank you very much for the this hour, more than an hour of sharing of knowledge and learning from our great speaker and panelists. So maybe in your room right now, please give a round of applause to our panelists and speaker. Or even though we cannot hear from them,
Thank you.
but then again, we would like to say thank you and extend our gratitude for your time. Okay, so with that, we would like to close our webinar for this evening. But before that, I would like to remind our participants, our dear participants, that the evaluation link will be provided on the chat button and for you to answer so that you can have your certificate of participation for this webinar. Only to those who pre-registered and who are present in this Zoom meeting will be provided by the certificate of participation. And we'll try to look away for our FB participants that are attending right now live streaming. So at the same time, please watch out. The ASLP TV is coming. So you can watch it on our YouTube page. Well, soon, our technical team is working on that, so that we can upload the recording of this webinar to those who are not able to join us tonight. I think everyone, when we announce this on our Facebook page, everyone will be interested to check out the recording if they don't have time tonight to join us. So to end our webinar series for this evening, I would like to call on our president to give her closing remarks. So once again, our president, Ms. Mercedita Servida. I'm Mercy.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I won't take you too long because it's already 9 o'clock. Okay. Please join me on behalf of ASLP Please join me in thanking Mr. Demian Katz, the lead developer of Vufind, Mr. Chito Angeles, former University Librarian of University of the Philippines. Thank you for your time and efforts in sharing your expertise and knowledge. Thank you for all the attendees. And lastly, thank you, my ASLP family. Your efforts are always appreciated. Thank you and good night.
Okay, thank you very much, Mom Mercy, for that closing remarks. So once again, I would like to say my last thank you for your time tonight, Demian and Sir Chito, and to our co-moderator, Justin, and to all our participants. So we have about 167 participants joining us on Zoom, and we have about 20 to 30 participants joining us on our FB live streaming. But before we end tonight, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to attend the first Fly Online Congress on November 25 to 27 next week. And at the same time, ASLP will have our parallel session with the topic Special Libraries Bounce Back. Tools, mindsets, and technologies in pandemic proofing your library with our very own Mr. Brian Boy Cortez as the speaker. This will be presented on November 26, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. So to those who are not yet done with the registration on the Fly Online Congress, please check the Fly website, Fly Facebook page for the information on how to register and enroll to the new landscape of Congress in the Philippine Library Association and Congresses. So I think with that, I was not able to forget something. Once again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm your moderator and co-host for this evening, and Kevin Cornetitan Shonko, the Board of Directors of Association of Special Libraries of the Philippines. So once again, thank you and good night to Philippines and good morning to Demian.
Thank you very much.